You are aware, as lead detective, that Mr. Cooper turned over the BlackBerry that belonged to his wife on the 12th.
To the police department, yes.
And that shortly thereafter it was given to Detective Dismukes.
Yes, sir.
And it was as of approximately 2 in the morning on July 13th that you were assigned as lead detective?
Yes, sir.
At that point, I believe Detective Dismukes testified that he simply put the BlackBerry in a desk drawer and made no attempts to access it.
That's correct.
Why is it that you did not direct, as lead detective, that BlackBerry actually be investigated?
At that point, we had the BlackBerry in our possession, and at that point, I didn't see that it needed to be investigated any further at that point.
Did it not occur to you at that time that valuable information might be stored on someone's cell phone?
We were looking at all aspects of everything. At what point I was notified that the phone was locked it was some point early on. Because it was locked, we continued on with other investigations. It wasn't, I don't want to characterize it that we didn't concern ourselves, but it wasn't something we went after immediately. We were concerned ourselves with a missing person at that point, following through with everything that we could do physically at that point.
Well, information contained on a smartphone like that can include people's instant messages.
Couldn't answer those questions for you. All I know is what I was told by people that examined the phones.
You don't know if smartphones can contain instant messages?
I don't have any information on that.
Do you know if smartphones can contain photographs?
I don't even, if you asked me if I even knew what a smartphone, if you were identifying it as a smartphone, I don't know anything about. That's why we ask experts to come in. I don't have any knowledge or not enough knowledge to say what would be on a smartphone or what would be stored in a smartphone. That's why we got assistance from other law enforcement and other agencies for that reason.
Did you have any understanding at that point of the potential value of figuring out where somebody had been based on data from their smartphone?
Again, I can't answer anything as far as the smartphone, as far as the data. That's why we sought expert opinion.
And when was it that you sought expert opinion?
As the investigation went on, one of the things we did was go back and check things again, go back, re-look through things. That was one of the issues that came up with her cell phone. It was locked. Detective Young informed me that he could call AT&T. I told him to follow through with that, and that's when they sought to go through AT&T. And then when that didn't work, I said, we have to just send it off as it is. And that's where that phone.
And so you say you sent it off as it was at that point for an expert opinion?
After he couldn't do anything else with it, there was nothing else we were going to do with it.
And at that point, he had informed you that he had actually wiped the data off the phone?
I don't know the exact wording he used, but he informed me that whatever process he was using, he didn't believe it worked.
But I believe Detective Young testified that he informed you as lead detective that, in fact, he had wiped the data off the phone. If that's the case, was that an inaccurate statement?
What I just said was I don't recall the exact wording he used, but he told me whatever process he did, it did not work.
And you followed up by saying that you then sent it out for further investigation?
Well, I didn't send it out. Detective Young, I told him to do whatever we had to do to get it further investigated, looked into, because we couldn't do anything else as far as what we were looking for at that time was just contact information and telephone numbers, things like that. So he couldn't do anything else with it because he told me the process that he had tried did not work. So as far as anything else, it would have to come from an expert.
Now, when you're talking about an expert, you have, as a detective with Cary Police, interacted with folks from the State Bureau of Investigation and had testing done there?
Yes.
You've used the Federal Bureau of Investigation and had testing done there.
Yes.
You've actually got private forensic examiners in different types of situations to do forensic testing.
Yes.
What type of testing did you request to be done on the phone after Detective Young told you that his process did not work?
I didn't request any specific testing. I just told him to follow, excuse me, told him to follow through whatever else, excuse me, whatever else we could do. As I said, I have no knowledge of the phone other than turning it on and making phone calls. So whatever else we could do was what I asked him to do. There was never any specificity to do this or do that. Whatever the next level he could do was what I asked him to do. I didn't have any information on it. That part of the investigation was broken down that Detective Young was handling that. Being one of the lead investigators in that part of it, he was tasked with that as his responsibility. I can't answer what he did or what his thinking was. He just informed me, and I said, well, let's do what we have to do at the next level. But I can't sit here and tell you that I told him to do this or that, because whatever was necessary to do is what I wanted him to do.
Did he make it clear to you that there was the potential that some information had been lost?
He told me, as I said, whatever that he was instructed by AT&T, the information that he was instructed to do, didn't appear that it worked. The exact wording, I don't know, but he told me that it didn't appear that it worked.
Did you respond at that point saying, well, whatever you need to do, figure this out? This is a piece of evidence in what looks like a homicide investigation.
I don't know my exact wording, and I don't know how I put it to him, but the information was that we needed to do whatever next step we had to do that he was responsible for, because it was something that he was tasked to handle all that type of evidence.
Now, had you been put on notice prior to Detective Young's evaluation of that phone that there might be important information on it?
As far as put on notice, what are you stating?
Had you received any information specific to data on that phone saying, this is important stuff, be careful with it?
We received a letter from your office, yes.
And was that the content of the letter? Saying,
I have to see the letter. If you have the letter, I can take a look at it and tell you exactly what the content is.
do you know who it was that Detective Young forwarded that telephone on to?
No, I do not.
Is there a reason why that's not something that you followed up on?
Because he was tasked with all that responsibility of the cell phones, the computers and things like that. That was his responsibility. He reported back to me, but that was his responsibility.
Detective Daniels, I'm showing you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 53. Could you please note the date of that letter?
July 30th, 2008.
And does it note on the face of the letter exactly whether it was received by the Cary Police Department?
Yes, it says, I guess it would be 8608, 11 a.m.
And August 6th is actually before Detective Young had done any evaluation of that cell phone. Is that correct?
I'm not exactly sure on the date, so I'd have to see his supplement to tell you exact date. I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, could you please read the letter to the jury?
Objection. Suspended.
Could you read the letter to yourself? And after, I will ask you a couple questions about it. In essence, does this document explain the type of information that can be on digital data, that can be contained in digital data?
Objection. Sustained.
Your Honor, I'd like to be heard.
Members of the jury, I'm going to ask you to step to the jury room for a moment. Let the record reflect that all members of the jury have left the courtroom. Mr. Cummings, you want to state your objection for the record?
My objection is that whatever is in that letter is hearsay at this point, and it was not directed to Mr. Daniels, nor was it authored by anyone. It was authored by a third party. That it's hearsay.
Do you want to be heard?
Yes, Your Honor. Hearsay would be something that is offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. This is simply a caution. The fact that it was received and actually noted by Cary police prior to...
He's not the Cary police. He's Detective George Daniels. If you want to ask him if he got that letter prior to Detective Young or reviewed the contents of that letter prior to Detective Young doing whatever it is that he did, that's a different story.
Your Honor, Detective Young...
The Cary Police Department got mail today. That doesn't mean he knows what that mail was. You can't attribute knowledge to him or notice to him just because it was received by the Cary Police, and that's what you're trying to do.
Judge, he's the superior officer in an investigation, and the subordinate actually received it, read it, was on notice, and disregarded it anyhow. As the senior investigator, that's something that should impact this investigator's assessment of the work quality and performance of the detectives who are operating under him.
To impute knowledge to him, I don't see where you can do that with this. Unless he did. I mean,
Judge, I believe I get to impeach his detective through...
It's not his detective.
But it is in this case, Judge. He is the lead detective. Everyone else is following his lead. Everyone else has hidden behind Detective George Daniels was the lead. Wasn't our call.
Right now, there's no evidence that anybody read that letter.
Actually, that's inaccurate, Your Honor. Yourself asked the question of Detective Young. Detective Young specifically stated on the record that he had read the letter and read it prior to doing any investigation of the phone.
Well, let me ask you some questions. Did you ever see that letter prior to Jim Young doing whatever it is he did to that phone?
I couldn't be for sure unless I saw his notes and the date that it was received. I got Denise Schwartz, who was the evidence custodian, got the letter. She held it for a couple days, I don't know how long, before I got it, because she didn't know exactly what it was about. When I got it, I then contacted for some assistance on what we should do. It was told to me at that time that it's a civil matter and that we continue on because it was in fact a civil matter, and all we were doing was trying to get basic information off the phone. We were not trying to inspect the phone. With that information, Detective Young was just following through with trying to get the basic call information, call history, things like that. We were not going any further than trying to get into the phone to see the basic information. And that was all. The letter itself was all I had to do with was, then I did in fact give it to Detective Young, but that was so he saw the letter because he was working with me in this investigation. At no time did we, and I believe I notified Mr. Curtis on the phone that we had got his letter also. So in fact, I did see it.
It is a very general letter explaining that there are a multitude of things that can be stored in digital format. It requires care and expertise. Please don't delete it. Please seek the appropriate type of examination. That's just saying don't delete the data.
Objection sustained if you'll bring in the jury.